Hi there, LaFerrero here, back with another houseplant basics guide. Today I'm going to be talking about watering your indoor houseplants, but before we get started, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and that bell icon to be notified in the future for more plant guides to come. I also want to let you know that just like in the light video that I did, that I asked some friends for some questions that they would have wanted to know when they got into taking care of their houseplants. So I do have these notes over here on my computer, as well as some other things that I thought about when I was doing the research for this video. So I will be referencing those from time to time. So let's go ahead and get started. The first question that I thought of when I started researching this video is, what does water actually do for my plant? And that seems like a really straightforward and weird question to ask, but I feel that's not something that we tend to think through fully as growers. In my research, I found a few things. The first being that it helps maintain the structure of a plant. So it's going to provide strong, stiff stems, or it's going to provide leaf shape in the case of succulents. The second was that it carries nutrients from the soil up through the plant. So as either the nutrients already existing in the soil or added fertilizer, it's going to absorb those, go into the roots, and then carry them up into the rest of the plant. And the third was that it maintains temperature. So as the water evaporates off the soil, it will provide like a homeostasis to keep the plant within a relative range that it likes to be. The next question that I received is, when and how often do I need to water? As far as when, there is a rule of thumb for outdoor plants that you should water either really early in the morning or in the evening. And the reason behind that is that during midday, which is the hottest part of your day, you're going to have the most evaporation. So if you would water around then, you would lose most of the water before your plants had a chance to absorb it. This obviously isn't the case for houseplants. They're in a more temperature-controlled climate, but my best suggestion would be actually to add your watering routine to the same time as you have other routines going on. So whether that does happen to be in the morning when you're getting ready for work or later at night when you have other chores happening, the most important thing though is to always be consistent in the watering. So if you do it in the morning, continue to do it in the morning. And as far as how often, I'm sorry to say this because I'm sure you've heard it in a lot of other guides, but it depends. And the reason that it depends is because there are so many factors that control when you need to water. Do you have a lot of air movement going on where you keep your plants? Do you live in a really dry climate? Do you live in a really humid climate? There are too many factors involved in when a soil will actually dry out that I can't sit here and say, okay, you need to water every 2 days, or you need to water, like a cup every day, or something along those lines, because it does vary from plant to plant and from climate to climate. As far as tips, though, on how often you should water, I would start out when you have a plant during the growing season, so maybe spring, maybe fall, depending on where you live. Check on them every other day. Go in and they call it the finger test. So you take your finger to about the first knuckle and you will stick your finger into the soil. If the tip of your finger is still, if you can still feel water or moistness in the soil, you don't want to water at that point. So if you check it every other day, you can get into a good rhythm about figuring out when your plants actually need water. If it is their dormant season, so maybe the middle of the summer for really hot, dry climates, or in the winter, like where I'm at, you want to probably check them about once a week, just because in their dormant season, they don't need nearly as much water as they would during their growing season. In the pursuit of watering often enough, you may ask yourself, do I need any tools to water? And I would say not necessarily. You could probably use either a drinking glass or a recycled water bottle, but there are definitely going to be things that you can purchase that will make watering significantly easier. The most obvious being a watering can. They come in a variety of sizes depending on how many plants you're caring for, and they're designed with a spout to reduce backsplash, which could be a risk with the other two that I mentioned before. You may also want to consider what kind of things that you're caring for. Do you have like African violets or plants that are sensitive to having water on their leaves? If that's the case, you may want to consider buying a syringe or a turkey baster to be able to put water directly at the base of a plant. Are you caring for seedlings or producing cuttings? In that case, I would recommend a spray bottle, which is what I use to water them daily to be able to produce roots. If you are someone who struggles with moisture content, such as either overwatering or underwatering, there are moisture meters available. They look a lot like a temperature, a meat thermometer, where you stick the probe into the soil and then it helps monitor the percentage of moisture in the soil so that you know when to water your plants. You may have also seen what are called water globes. They are glass globes with a long spout that is angled at one end, and you fill it up with water, stick it in the soil, and it will leach the water into the soil as it becomes dry. They can work for plants that tend to be particularly water hungry, such as peace lilies. And a question that I'm also going to lump into this section is watering while you're on vacation. I would say if you are going on like a weekend vacation, about 3 days, if you soak your plants before you leave, if you soak them, let them drip out, put them back where they need to go, they'll be perfectly fine for that 3-day stretch. You shouldn't need to worry about them while you're gone for about 3 days. If you're gone longer than that, or like on a week or 2-week vacation, there are some options that you can find available to you to be able to care for your plants while you're gone. One of the things that I found were called hydro spikes. I'm not super familiar with these because I've never used them before, and I've only found them in a couple of videos that I've watched. But they basically work by reverse osmosis. So you stick the spike into your soil. It's already pre-filled with water, and it has a tube that runs down into a water source, so like a big bucket or a gallon full of water, and it will pull the water up the tube into the hydrospike, which will then release it into your soil, and it will last as long as the water does in whatever container it's pulling it from. So if you have a large gallon, until that gallon runs out, your plants are then being watered. Along the same lines of the hydro spikes, I saw kind of like DIY options of this, where you take string, like cotton string, you run it to your water source, your bucket of water, and then lay the strings into the soil so that it pulls the water up and waters your plant while you're gone. There are probably some other options that you could find for like contraptions that you can set up or things that you can buy to put in the soil while you're away. But one of the probably more reliable methods, if you are afraid that water will ever run out, is seeing if you can find a friend or a family member who will come and care for your plants while you're away. Another question that I received is, can I use tap water to water my plants? And the short answer is yes. I use tap water personally, and I've never seen any issues with how my plants react to that. But you do want to know that tap water is what is considered hard or alkaline, meaning that it's high in calcium. And because of the treatment process, it also has chlorine and fluoride added to it. Now, when it comes from the treatment plant into your house, it's also most likely being ran through a water softener, which is then treated with salt. So you have a lot of additives in your water that could potentially affect the growth of your plant. If you're not sure what kind of treatment your water goes through, you can call your water company, because these are things that vary from just town to town in the same state. So you may want to find out what kind of treatment process your tap water goes through. If you are a tap water user and you are curious about things that you can do to make it safer for use on your plants, I do have some tips for you. The first tip when using tap water is make sure you're using room temperature or at least lukewarm water. You never want to water your plants with obviously hot water or even cold water because that can actually shock their system. The next tip that I have is to actually let the water sit out for a day. If you have like leftover milk jugs or juice jugs, anything that's clear or see-through, fill that up with tap water, leave the cap off, and let it sit for a day. That's going to let a lot of the chlorine evaporate out, and then the salt will actually settle at the bottom of the jug, meaning that you can use all but about the last inch of water and avoid a lot of the salt additives and reduce the amount of chlorine that is going into the soil. You also have the option, since tap water is alkaline, to add a little bit of vinegar. And when I mean a little, I mean a little. So it would be about a teaspoon to every quart of water to try and make it more acidic. And the last tip is to use the soak and dry method occasionally. If you're not sure what the soak and dry method is, it's taking a pot and you can put it in like the bathtub, or if you have the ability to put it outside, you actually want to completely soak it with water until you have a significant amount of water running out of the drainage hole in the bottom. What this actually does is it allows the salts that build up in the soil to leach out of that drainage hole and get them out of the soil so that your plant isn't taking it in through the roots. So this next question, I actually have a little bit of show and tell for you guys. The question is, how do I know if I have over or underwatered? Anecdotally, I would say that overwatering is actually just as easy to do as underwatering, especially when the plant is in its dormant season and needs less water anyways. So keep in mind that either of these could happen to you, but it's really easy to fix if you're noticing the signs that your plant is giving you. Because of my show and tell, I am going to start with underwatering, but the most obvious sign of underwatering is that your plant is dying. So you have leaves that are dry, crispy, and brown, and pulling very easily off of the base of the plant. Another very obvious sign that you've underwatered is that your soil is dry and crumbly, or that it's actually completely pulled away from the edges of the pot, and you have a whole ring that you can see down to the bottom of the pot. Another obvious sign that you've underwatered is what you see here with my peace lily. Peace lilies are very water hungry in my experience, but they're also really good at telegraphing when they need water. So you're going to see situations just like this, where the stem actually bends where it's holding the weight of the leaf. And that's because there's not enough water in the stem to be able to maintain its shape. Once I give this water, in about an hour, maybe 2, it'll have perked up and look just like its old self. Now, as far as signs of overwatering, some of them actually can overlap. If I were to let this go too long and not give it water, these leaves would start to turn yellow, eventually brown, and then die off, like I mentioned in the beginning. Overwatering can have the same symptoms of yellow and browning leaves, but there are some slight differences. So the yellow and brown leaves are actually going to be the older growth. It's going to be the much larger leaves, and it's the plant is saying, okay, these older ones are not worth it anymore. I'm going to put my focus into new growth to make sure I stay alive. The obvious way to tell that you're overwatering, though, is touching your soil. If you go to touch your soil, your hand comes back wet. You need to take time and let your plant dry out. If you are a carer of succulents, though, some of your symptoms may be a little different. So succulents, if they get overwatered, the tips will actually turn brown and dry up. So it'll almost be kind of like a cactus point where they get really sticky, like a thorn. And the lower segments of your succulents will actually start to turn yellow or brown, and they'll start to look like dried, wrinkly fruit because they're taking too much water in, and they're like, oh no, this is too much. This isn't worth keeping this segment anymore, so it starts to die back. Now, in the case of overwatering, Something to keep in mind is the risk of root rot. You've probably heard about root rot quite a bit if you care for plants. Now, the question there is, what is root rot? And that seems a little self-explanatory, but what you're basically doing there is you're drowning the roots. So when you soak a soil to the point that you can cause root rot, there is no oxygen flowing through that soil to be able to allow the plant to be able to intake oxygen from its roots, which it actually does need. So as it sits in that water, it starts to decay and rot. Now, if the disease is severe enough, the stems and the growth close to the soil may actually be soft and squishy. So if your root rot is severe enough, you'll actually see it without taking the pot or the plant out of the soil. So a real life situation that I can kind of equate to this is when you rake up leaves after a long winter. If you have leaf litter left over the fall and it's sat under a bunch of snow for the entire season, that final layer down at the bottom is going to be really black, and it would have started to have rot. So that is the exact same situation that you're putting your roots into if you are overwatering. So it's a really serious situation, but if you catch it in time, it still can be fixed. And the best way to do that is to actually just completely repot your plant, give it fresh soil, and let it dry out for a little bit. Surprise! I have one last section for you guys, and not only do you get one show and tell in this video, you're going to be getting two. Now this section is in regards to a question I got about when you are buying a pot, does it need a drainage hole? And yes, absolutely, when you are searching for a brand new container to put your plants in, do try to find one that has a drainage hole in it. If for some reason that is not possible, or you happen to come across a container that is just really striking your fancy for whatever reason and it doesn't have drainage of any kind, the one thing that I would encourage you to not do is add anything to the bottom to try and improve drainage. So things like gravel or rocks or crushed soda cans. You may have heard of this idea before, where if you put that on the bottom, it's going to improve the drainage out of your soil so that your plants are not sitting and soaking water. And that's not exactly true because of a term called saturation point. Now, a saturation point is the stage at which no more of a substance, so in this case water, can be dissolved into a solution. So in this case, the water absorbing into the soil. Now, because soil is always consistent, it's always going to have the same saturation point. And to help you guys understand this a little better, I actually am going to be doing some experiments here to help you actually visualize what I mean when I say a saturation point. So what's going to happen if you essentially raise the soil level by adding something to the bottom of your pot. So what I have here is a bowl full of water. I have added a little bit of black icing dye so that you can see the water a little better. And I have some dry sponges, and I'm going to show you what a saturation point looks like in a sponge and what I'm talking about for when it in terms of soil. So if I were to dip this sponge into the water, we pull it out, we let it drip off. Now it will continue to drip because the water doesn't want to stay saturated. Eventually it will soak out, but because of the material that it is, you have a layer where the water just sits, where it doesn't completely drop out of the sponge. And it's about an inch worth of saturation. So from here down, there is just water sitting there. So if you see, if I squeeze, I'm just getting a bunch of water. That is a saturation point, and that saturation point will remain consistent. So another sponge. We're going to dip it sideways this time. And again, it's about an inch worth of saturation. Now, this is a representation of what you're doing when you are adding something to the bottom of your pot. So let's say this is your pot here. Let's say you add, let's assume this one is all soil. And then, sorry, let me think about this for a second. So this is your pot, right? You decide to add this much and some kind of additive at the bottom to improve the drainage. Because your saturation point remains the same, you're pushing your saturation point all the way up here. Now, if you were to move to a smaller pot, say this is your pot now, so you're essentially cutting it in half, and you add the same amount of additives to the bottom, you're now pushing your saturation point all the way up here. And this is where all your root growth would be. So all of that saturated water, all that saturated soil, I'm sorry, is now sitting on your roots. That is why you don't want to add anything to the bottom of your pots. Now, not only do I have, gotta clean up here a little bit, do I have a water demonstration, I'm actually going to do this with soil. And we're actually going to try a couple different things. Because my significant other had the suggestion, if you mix your additive, in my case I have some marbles, into, like, completely throughout your soil, is the same thing going to happen? So I am going to cut here for a minute while I set all this up, because you do not need to hear the tinking of marbles while I get this all set up, but I will have one where the marbles will sit completely at the bottom and then soil on top, and then the other one will have marbles all throughout the soil. So I will be right back. Alright, so we're all set up. Now, I do want to mention that the soil is just a regular potting soil mix, and what I have done is actually pre-moistened it. So that means that it will clump. It's moist enough to clump, but no water will come out. So there's not enough water for any droplets to come out. So this is just moist enough to stick together, which is the similar situation to how you'd want it to be when you are potting a new plant. So as you can see, we have this one here, and thankfully, because they are mason jars, they do have lines on them, so that quite helps, but I still am going to use the ruler. This one has the marbles at the bottom and the soil on top, and you probably can't see it very well, but this one has marbles mixed in together with the soil. So this jar, I have seen this experiment done before, and it has the same results as the sponge. I have not seen this done, so this is going to be new to both you guys and myself, so this is kind of fun. And then this is obviously just some tap water at room temperature. So we're going to start here. I'm going to turn it around so that I get some consistent water. And all right, so I have water draining into the bottom. And I hope this is showing up well on the camera. But there's a saturation point of about right here. So again, about an inch of saturation. So all of this soil is now completely wet. All that water has drained down. You can see the extra water down here. So it obviously lets it drain down into the bottom of the pot. But you still have completely soaked soil right here. So if you have anything that has more than shallow roots, that means that those roots are now sitting in completely saturated soil, and that water has nowhere to go until it equalizes out and then drains into the bottom. But again, you still have all of this extra water sitting down here, which can lead to root rot and fungus. Now we're going to test this one. And again, I'm quite curious. I've not seen this one done before. All right. Let that settle. Interesting. Okay. You know, as an alternative, I could see this potentially being a good idea. You still risk overwatering just because it doesn't have a drainage hole. But your saturation point is now at the bottom of the pot. And you have the added benefit that you're adding aeration to your soil. So you putting your additive completely mixed in with the soil actually presents, in my opinion, less of a risk than putting it directly at the bottom. That's interesting. We're learning things, guys. This is really fun. So yeah, you know, don't follow this one. Don't do this one for sure. This is a potential, you know, this one has potential. If you don't have drainage holes in your pots, or again, like I said, you find something that really strikes your fancy and does not have a drainage hole, this could work. Not gonna lie. So yeah, I would still be careful, because you do have the high risk of overwatering just because there's nowhere else for that water to go. But I could see this one being really successful. So hey guys, like I said, we're learning stuff. Anyways, that's it for me for today. So again, thank you so much for coming. Make sure to like and subscribe. Leave your comments down below if you have any questions and I don't know the answer. I will make sure to do some research and get back to you, because again, I'm not an expert. I am an amateur gardener and I'm learning with you guys. But stay cool and don't forget to wet your plants.